Malicious gossip. Someone leans in across the table. Their voice drops. Did you hear what she did? You haven't heard. But now you're listening. And that's when the damage starts. This is malicious gossip. It's not casual conversation. It's a weapon dressed up as concern, built to destroy someone's reputation without ever confronting them directly. The person spreading it frames it as worry, as shock, as something they hate to mention. But the intent never changes. Plant doubt. Shift perception. Make sure that when you think of that person again, something darker comes to mind. It works by bypassing your defenses. If someone attacked you openly, you'd fight back. But gossip moves in shadows. By the time it reeks you, it's passed through 3, 4, 5 conversations. Each retelling strips away context, adds weight, turns ambiguity into fact. The original speaker is nowhere near the damage. They're protected by distance, by deniability, by the people who carried it forward. Here's what makes it work. The information doesn't have to be true. It just has to be believable. A half-truth sticks better than a lie because it has just enough reality to hold. Someone's struggle gets reframed as weakness. A mistake becomes a pattern. A moment of frustration becomes proof of instability. The gossip spreads not because people verify it, but because it confirms what they already suspected, or because it's too interesting not to share. In workplaces, it sounds like a warning. Be careful working with him. In friendships, it's packaged as loyalty. I thought you should know what people are saying. In families, it hides behind concern. I'm worried about her, honestly. The frame changes. The mechanics don't. Someone's reputation gets chipped away, one conversation at a time, and they never see it happening. The cruelty isn't just in the content. It's in the isolation. Once malicious gossip takes root, defending yourself makes you look defensive. Denying it makes people wonder why you're worried. The more you try to correct the story, the more it seems like there's something to hide. And the gossip keeps going, unchallenged, because no one wants to be the person defending someone everyone's already decided to doubt. By the time you realize what's been said, the damage is done. Trust has shifted. Opportunities have closed. Relationships have cooled. And the person who started it, they're untouchable. They never said it to your face. Reputational gossip. Your name comes up at lunch. You're not there. Someone mentions a project you worked on. There's a pause. A slight grimace. Well, you know how that went. You don't know this is happening. But everyone at that table just learned something about you. Or thinks they did. And next time your name comes up, that piece of information comes with it. This is reputational gossip. It doesn't need malice. It just needs repetition. It's how groups decide who's reliable, who's difficult, who's competent, who's a risk. It doesn't attack. It categorizes. And once a category sticks, escaping it is nearly impossible. The psychology is simple. People trust patterns more than single events. One mistake might be forgiven. But when that mistake gets mentioned twice, 3 times, across different conversations, it stops being an incident. It becomes who you are. Reputational gossip builds that pattern, one retelling at a time. It happens in hiring. Someone's name gets floated for a role. Another person at the table says, "I've heard mixed things." That's all it takes. The candidate never knows why the offer didn't come. In social circles, it shapes who gets invited, who gets trusted, who gets second chances. A single unverified story repeated enough times becomes common knowledge. And common knowledge doesn't need proof. It just needs agreement. What makes this so effective is that it feels neutral. The people spreading it don't see themselves as gossips. They're sharing information, being helpful, making sure others have context. I thought you should know before you work with them. The framing sounds protective. But the result is the same. Your reputation gets shaped by people you've never met, based on stories you've never heard, in rooms you'll never enter. And because it's not overtly hostile, there's no clear defense. Confronting someone who spread malicious gossip might work. But confronting someone who casually mentioned concerns in a meeting, that makes you look paranoid. Reputational gossip lives in the space between visibility and proof. It's not quite an attack. So it's not quite something you can fight. By the time you realize your reputation has shifted, the narrative is set. You start noticing the distance. Opportunities dry up. Responses get shorter. Invitations stop. And when you ask what changed, no one can point to a single thing. Because it wasn't one thing. It was 100 small moments scattered across conversations you weren't part of, building a version of you that exists entirely outside your control. Coalition gossip. You walk into the break room. The conversation stops. Not abruptly. Just a shift in tone, a change in subject, smiles that don't quite reach the eyes. You weren't supposed to be part of this. And now you know it. What you just witnessed wasn't random chatter. It was coalition building. Groups don't just form around shared interests. They form around shared information. And gossip is the currency that buys membership. When people exchange secrets about someone who isn't there, they're not just talking. They're drawing a line, us and them, inside and outside. The mechanism is straightforward. Trust gets established through disclosure. When someone shares something they shouldn't, something private or damaging about a third party, they're making an offer. If you listen, if you reciprocate with your own piece of information, you've joined. The bond isn't based on affection. It's based on mutual knowledge. You both know things you're not supposed to know. And that creates loyalty not through love, but through complicity. You see it in office politics. A manager confides to certain employees about another team member's performance issues. Those employees aren't just receiving information. They're being recruited. They're being shown who's in favor and who's not. And by staying silent, by nodding along, they've picked a side. The coalition strengthens. The excluded person weakens. In friend groups, it works the same way. Two people start sharing observations about a third. Small things at first. Have you noticed she's been distant? Then bigger things. Frustrations. Resentments. Interpretations of behavior. Each exchange deepens the alliance between the two speakers. And with every conversation, the third person moves further outside the circle, often without knowing why. What makes coalition gossip so effective is that it doesn't feel like exclusion. It feels like connection. The people involved experience it as bonding, as trust building, as friendship deepening. They're not trying to hurt anyone. They're just sharing what they see. But the structure remains the same. Information flows to some, not to others. And those patterns of flow determine who holds power, who gets protected, and who gets left out. By the time the excluded person realizes what's happened, the coalition is already solid. Changing it would require breaking bonds that feel personal, even though they were built on someone else's absence. Social grooming. It looks like intimacy. Two people huddled close, voices low, sharing details about someone else's life. Laughing, shaking their heads. The exchange feels warm, almost therapeutic. You think they were getting closer, and they are, but not the way it seems. What they're doing is social grooming, the human version of what primates do when they pick through each other's fur. On the surface, it's about care, about maintaining bonds, about staying connected. But underneath, it's about hierarchy. It's about checking who's still aligned with whom, who's still following the same rules, who's still safe to trust. Gossip isn't just noise. It's information work. When people talk about others, they're testing boundaries. They're checking whether their judgments match, whether their values align, whether they can still rely on each other to see the world the same way. Every story shared, every reaction observed confirms or adjusts where they stand relative to each other. In practice, it's subtle. A friend mentions something another friend did. Not with malice. Just as an observation. Did you hear Sarah's moving again? The response matters. If you react with concern, sympathy, judgment, or indifference, you've just revealed something about your position. And the person asking has just confirmed whether you're still in sync with them. If the reactions align, the bond holds. If they don't, distance starts to form. At work, it happens during lunch. In families, it's phone calls where one person updates another about a third. In every case, the content matters less than the exchange itself. The point isn't what's being said about the absent person. The point is what's being established between the people present. The trap is that it feels harmless. It feels like normal conversation, like friendship, like family staying connected, and it is those things. But it's also constant calibration. Who's in? Who's out? Who's behaving correctly? Who's drifting? And because it's wrapped in warmth, in shared laughter, in the appearance of care, no one questions it. It just becomes the way relationships work. What you don't see is how quickly that warmth can turn. The moment you become the subject instead of the audience, the same intimacy that felt like connection becomes the mechanism of exclusion. The same people who shared with you start sharing about you. And the grooming continues, just with someone else on the outside. Whisper network. How do you know who not to work with before anyone officially warns you? How does everyone seem to know which professor to avoid, which manager has a reputation, which colleague can't be trusted, without it ever being written down or announced in a meeting? Information travels. Not through official channels, through whispers. Through careful conversations in hallways, over drinks, in private messages. Someone new joins the team. Within weeks, they know who to stay away from. No one told them directly, but the message came through. That's the whisper network. It operates in the gaps, where HR won't act, where formal complaints go nowhere, where consequences don't exist for people with enough power or protection. When the official system fails, people build an unofficial one. They pass warnings. They share experiences. They make sure the next person knows what they're walking into. On the surface, it's protective. And often it is. It keeps people safe from repeat offenders. It fills in where institutions refuse to. But whisper networks have a design flaw. They rely on trust, not verification. Information gets shared because someone knows someone who heard from someone else. And with each retelling, details shift. Context gets lost. A legitimate warning can turn into reputation damage. A misunderstanding can become common knowledge. And because it's all happening off the record, there's no process for correction. No way to challenge what's being said. No way to know what's true. In some cases, the network works exactly as intended. A serial harasser gets quietly blacklisted. New hires get warned. Vulnerable people avoid danger. But in other cases, it becomes a weapon. Someone with a grudge can seed information into the network. And once it's in, it spreads. Not because people are malicious, but because they're trying to protect each other. They trust the source. They pass it on. And by the time it reaches the 10th or 20th person, no one remembers where it started or whether it was ever verified. The power of a whisper network isn't in what it says. It's in what it doesn't say. It exists because the official structures failed, but because it exists in shadow, it can't be held accountable the way formal systems can. It operates on belief, on trust, on the assumption that the people passing information are doing so in good faith. And most of the time, they are. But the structure itself, built to bypass broken systems, carries no safeguards. What makes it dangerous is that it feels like justice. It feels like protection. And it often is. But without visibility, without accountability, it can also become the thing it was designed to resist. Indirect aggression. She doesn't confront you. She doesn't raise her voice. She doesn't say anything directly hostile. But after the meeting, you notice the shift. Colleagues who used to chat with you keep their distance. Invitations stop coming. When you ask if something's wrong, everyone says no. Everything's fine. But you can feel it. Something's changed. Indirect aggression doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It works by shaping the environment around you without ever engaging you face to face. The aggressor spreads doubt, shares concerns, plants questions in other people's minds. And once those seeds are in place, the damage happens on its own. You don't get attacked. You get avoided. The brilliance of it is in the plausible deniability. If you confront the person spreading the rumors, they deny it. I never said that. And technically, they might be telling the truth. They didn't make a direct accusation. They just expressed worry, raised a question, shared an observation. I don't know, I just noticed she seems stressed lately. That's all it takes. The listener fills in the rest. Stressed turns into unstable. A casual comment becomes a pattern. And the original speaker never has to own the interpretation. This shows up everywhere. In schools, it's the popular kid who doesn't bully directly but makes sure everyone knows who's worth talking to and who isn't. In workplaces, it's the colleague who expresses concerns to the boss, not as accusations, but as worried observations. I just think maybe he's not handling the workload well. In families, it's the relative who subtly undermines someone's credibility by sharing stories framed as concern. I'm just worried about her judgment lately. What makes indirect aggression so effective is that it operates below the threshold of accountability. You can't report someone for being worried. You can't call out someone for sharing observations. And by the time the damage is visible, the trail is gone. The aggressor's hands are clean. They never did anything wrong. They were just expressing care. The victim, meanwhile, is stuck. Fighting back makes them look paranoid. Defending themselves against vague concerns makes those concerns seem more credible. And because the attack never happens in the open, there's nothing concrete to push back against. Just a growing sense that something's wrong, that people are pulling away, that opportunities are disappearing. By the time you realize what's been happening, your reputation is already compromised. And the person who orchestrated it, they're sympathetic, concerned even. I had no idea people felt that way about you. Status gossip. Why does everyone know exactly where they stand? Not because anyone announced it. Because the information flows differently depending on who you are. Some people hear things early. Others hear them late or not at all. And that difference isn't random. It's status gossip at work, sorting people into tiers without ever making it official. Information is power. Not just what you know, but when you know it and who tells you. When a decision is coming, certain people get the news first. Not through a meeting, through a conversation, a quiet heads up, a casual mention over coffee. By the time it reaches everyone else, it's already been shaped, interpreted, positioned. The early recipients aren't just informed. They're empowered. They had time to prepare. Time to react. Time to influence what happens next. This creates a hierarchy that mirrors and sometimes determines formal power structures. In offices, you can track influence by watching who gets pulled into conversations before announcements. In social groups, you see it in who knows about plans before invitations go out. The people at the center of gossip networks don't just hear more. They hear first. And that timing advantage compounds. It works in reverse too. When you're on the outside, you notice the delay. You find out about changes after they've been decided. You hear about conflicts after they've been resolved. You're always a step behind, always catching up, always reacting instead of shaping. And that lag reinforces your position. The less you know, the less you can participate. The less you participate, the less you're included in future exchanges. What makes status gossip effective is that it doesn't look like exclusion. It looks like conversation, like friendship, like trust. The people sharing information early aren't deliberately keeping others out. They're just talking to the people they talk to. But the result is the same. Access to information becomes a marker of where you stand. And where you stand determines what you get access to. Over time, the pattern hardens. The people who were in early conversations stay in early conversations. The people who were left out stay left out. And the gaps widen, not because anyone decided to exclude you, but because the flow of information naturally concentrates around certain nodes. By the time you realize you're on the outside, the network is already set. Moral gossip. Someone did something wrong. Or maybe they didn't. But either way, people are talking, not quietly, not privately, publicly, passionately, with the kind of certainty that doesn't leave room for nuance. This isn't information sharing. It's moral enforcement. And gossip is the weapon. When communities can't use formal punishment, they use shame. They use reputation. They use the kind of social pressure that makes people conform without needing rules or authority. Moral gossip is the mechanism. Someone violates a norm, spoken or unspoken, and the conversation starts. Did you hear what he said? Can you believe she did that? The details spread. The judgments accumulate. And the target standing shifts. The power isn't in the accusation itself. It's in the collective repetition. One person saying you crossed a line is an opinion. 10 people saying it is a consensus. And once consensus forms, it doesn't matter whether the original claim was accurate. The group has decided. You're out of bounds. And the gossip makes sure everyone knows it. You see it in small towns where everyone knows everyone else's business. A misstep becomes the subject of weeks of conversation, not because people are cruel, but because the community is regulating itself. No police, no courts, just shared disapproval spread through whispers and glances and careful distance. In online communities, it's faster and more visible. A tweet, a screenshot, a thread. Within hours, a moral verdict is wreaked, and the gossip network enforces it. The trap is that moral gossip feels righteous. It feels like justice. It feels like holding people accountable when no other system will. And sometimes it is. But it's also a system with no due process, no appeals, no way to correct mistakes. The gossip decides what's moral. The gossip decides who violated it. And the gossip decides the punishment. What makes it dangerous is the speed. Moral gossip doesn't wait for context. It doesn't verify. It reacts. And once the reaction spreads, once the story is told and retold and agreed upon, reversing it becomes nearly impossible. The narrative is set. The judgment is made. And the person at the center has no way to argue back without seeming like they're dodging accountability. Exclusion via gossip. You stop getting invited. Not all at once. Just gradually. A party you weren't told about. A group chat you're not in. Plans made without you. When you ask, people are vague. Oh, it was last minute. Oh, we thought you were busy. But you weren't, and it keeps happening. Gossip doesn't just spread information. It draws boundaries. It marks who's in and who's out. And once you're on the wrong side of that line, getting back across becomes almost impossible. Exclusion via gossip doesn't require a vote. It doesn't require confrontation. It just requires enough people agreeing, quietly, that you're not part of the group anymore. The mechanism is simple. Someone shares a concern about you. Maybe it's real. Maybe it's exaggerated. Maybe it's completely fabricated. But it spreads. And as it spreads, it shapes how people see you. They start noticing things that confirm the story. They start interpreting your actions through that lens. And without realizing it, they start pulling back. Not because they decided to exclude you. Because the information they received made it feel natural. In friend groups, it starts with 1 or 2 people. They share frustrations about you with others. those others start seeing you differently. Invitations slow down. Conversations get shorter. You're still technically part of the group, but the warmth is gone. And because no one confronts you directly, you can't fix it. You can't defend yourself against a process you can't see. At work, it's subtler but just as effective. Gossip positions you as difficult, unreliable, or problematic. Meetings happen without you. Projects move forward without your input. Colleagues who used to collaborate now keep their distance. And when you ask why, the answers are always vague. Just how things worked out. But things didn't work out randomly. They worked out because the gossip shaped perceptions, and perceptions shaped decisions. The cruelty is in the invisibility. You're being excluded, but there's no moment where someone tells you. There's no fight, no accusation. Just a slow withdrawal that you can feel but can't confront. And the gossip that caused it keeps circulating, reinforcing the boundary, making sure you stay on the outside. Rumor personalization. A story starts. It's vague. Generic. I heard something happened at the office. But by the time it reaches you, it's not vague anymore. It has names. Details. A clear villain. And somehow, even though the original source couldn't confirm any of it, everyone believes it's true. This is rumor personalization. The process by which an ambiguous piece of information becomes a specific accusation as it moves through a network. Each person who hears it adds something. A guess about who was involved, an assumption about what happened, a connection to something they heard before. And with each addition, the rumor becomes more concrete, more detailed, more believable. The psychology behind it is simple. People don't like uncertainty. When they hear a vague story, they fill in the gaps. They match it to patterns they recognize. They connect it to people they already have opinions about. And once they've added those details, they pass the story on as if those details were part of the original information. The next person hears it with the additions, believes them, and adds more. You see it everywhere. A workplace rumor starts as something's going on with leadership. By the end of the day, it's the CEO is being forced out because of financial mismanagement. No one verified it. No one checked the source. But each retelling added a layer, and now it sounds too specific to be wrong. In social circles, it's faster. I think they're having problems becomes. They're definitely getting divorced, within hours. Someone's struggle becomes someone's scandal. A moment of difficulty becomes proof of a pattern. And the person at the center of it has no idea what's being said about them, because the rumor has evolved far beyond anything they actually did or said. What makes rumor personalization so effective is that by the time it reaches critical mass, it feels verified. It has too many details to be made up. Too many people are saying the same thing. But those details weren't verified. They were invented one person at a time, each addition plausible enough to pass along, until the accumulation creates something that sounds like fact. And once the rumor is personalized, it's nearly impossible to correct. Because correcting it requires dismantling every layer of detail, every assumption, every connection that was added along the way. The original vague story might have been easy to dismiss. But the version that's circulating now, it's too specific, too widely believed, too embedded in the narrative to just erase. Character assassination. There's a difference between gossip and destruction. Gossip spreads information. Character assassination weaponizes it. The goal isn't to share news or build connection. It's to dismantle someone's reputation so thoroughly that rebuilding becomes impossible. It starts with selection. Not every piece of information gets used. Only the ones that damage. A mistake from years ago gets resurfaced. A private struggle gets exposed. A moment of weakness gets framed as a pattern. The person spreading it isn't interested in balance or context. They're interested in impact. And they choose the details that hit hardest. Then comes the framing. The information isn't just shared. It's interpreted. Position. Given meaning that serves the attacker's purpose. A professional disagreement becomes evidence of incompetence. A personal boundary becomes proof of coldness. A moment of frustration becomes a sign of instability. The facts might be real, but the story being built around them is designed to destroy. What makes character assassination different from other forms of gossip is the intent. It's not accidental. It's not casual. It's targeted. The person orchestrating it knows exactly what they're doing. They're not trying to inform. They're trying to eliminate. To make sure the target loses credibility, loses relationships, loses opportunities. And they use gossip as the delivery system because it spreads faster and further than any direct attack could. You see it in politics, where operatives dig up anything damaging and feed it to networks that will amplify it. You see it in workplaces, where someone threatened by a colleague's success starts planting stories that undermine their competence. You see it in personal conflicts, where revenge takes the form of whispered campaigns that turn entire social circles against someone. The devastation isn't just in the information. It's in the comprehensiveness. Character assassination doesn't leave a way out. Every defense gets reframed as evasion. Every explanation gets dismissed as excuses. The narrative becomes self-sealing. And the gossip network, convinced they're hearing the truth, spreads it without questioning the source or the motive behind it. By the time the target realizes what's happening, the damage is catastrophic. Relationships are gone. Trust is shattered. Reputation is unsalvageable. And the person who orchestrated it, they're nowhere near the wreckage. They just started the fire. The gossip did the rest. Scandal amplification. Something happens. A mistake. A misstep. A moment that probably should have stayed private. But it doesn't. It gets out. And instead of fading, it grows. Not because the original event was that significant, but because the gossip won't let it die. This is scandal amplification. The process by which a relatively minor incident becomes a major crisis, not through its own gravity, but through the relentless attention gossip gives it. Every retelling adds energy. Every conversation keeps it alive. What started as a single mistake becomes the defining story about someone, not because it was the worst thing they ever did, but because it was the thing people couldn't stop talking about. The mechanism is feedback. Someone hears about the incident and tells someone else. That person tells two more. Each retelling invites reactions, questions, judgments. Those reactions generate more conversations. More conversations mean more people hear about it. And the more people hear about it, the more significant it seems. The gossip itself creates the impression that this must be important, because why else would everyone be talking about it? In reality, the scale of attention is often disconnected from the scale of the offense. A celebrity makes an awkward comment. Within hours, it's the top trending topic. Not because the comment was uniquely terrible, but because the gossip network latched onto it and fed it back on itself, creating a cycle where the attention justifies more attention. In personal contexts, it works the same way. Someone at work makes a mistake, a bad presentation, a missed deadline, an awkward email. Under normal circumstances, it would be noticed, maybe commented on, then forgotten. But if gossip picks it up, it becomes a scandal. People start sharing their own observations. I always thought there was something off about them. The incident becomes evidence of deeper problems. And suddenly, a single mistake defines their entire reputation. What makes scandal amplification so destructive is that it's self-perpetuating. The more people talk about it, the more justified they feel in continuing to talk about it. And the person at the center can't make it stop. Apologizing sometimes helps, but often it just generates more conversations, more analysis, more judgment. The gossip feeds on every response, every reaction, every attempt to move on. And long after the incident itself has become irrelevant, the memory of the scandal remains, not the details. not the context. Just the vague sense that something happened, that this person was at the center of something bad. And that impression, built entirely by gossip, outlasts the truth. Information brokerage. She always knows. Before the announcement, before the meeting, before anyone else has a clue what's coming. And she doesn't just know. She decides who else gets to know, who hears it early, who hears it late, who never hears it at all. Information brokerage is about control. Not just holding information, but controlling its flow. The broker sits at the intersection of multiple networks. They hear things from different sources. They know who needs what. And they distribute selectively, using access as leverage. Every piece of information they share is a transaction. Every disclosure creates a debt. The power comes from positioning. A broker doesn't need formal authority. They just need to be the person people come to when they want to know what's really going on. And once that position is established, it reinforces itself. People share information with the broker because the broker has information to trade. The broker becomes indispensable, not through skill or rank, but through access. In offices, you see it in the person who somehow knows about layoffs before HR does. Who hears about promotions before they're announced. Who can tell you which projects are getting funded and which are being quietly killed. They don't learn this through official channels. They learn it through relationships, through gossip networks, through being the person everyone talks to. In social circles, the broker is the one who knows who's dating, who's breaking up, who's moving, who's struggling. They're not necessarily the most popular, but they're connected. They know people across different groups, and they use that position to stay informed and to control what others know. What makes information brokerage effective is the dependency it creates. Once people rely on you for information, they need to stay on good terms with you. They share things with you to maintain access. They defer to you to avoid being cut off. And the broker, sitting at the center of all those exchanges, accumulates power that has nothing to do with their job title or social status. The cost is that the broker can never fully trust anyone. Because their power depends on controlling information, they can't afford to share everything. They can't be transparent. They have to keep calculating who gets what, when, and why. And eventually, the role becomes isolating. You're connected to everyone, but you're not actually close to anyone. Selective disclosure. He tells you something private, something he shouldn't be sharing. And in that moment you feel trusted, special, like you're part of an inner circle. But what you don't know is that he's telling other people too. Different versions, different details. Each person hearing just enough to feel included, never enough to see the full picture. Selective disclosure is manipulation disguised as intimacy. It's the strategic sharing of information to create loyalty, to build alliances, to control narratives. The person doing it isn't being honest. They're being calculated. Every disclosure serves a purpose. Every secret shared is a tool. The mechanism is simple. By sharing something private, you create a bond. The person receiving the information feels like they matter, like they're being let in. And that feeling generates loyalty. They're less likely to question you, less likely to push back, because you trusted them. And people don't want to betray trust, even when the trust was never real. But selective disclosure isn't just about creating loyalty. It's also about control. By telling different people different things, you can shape how a situation is perceived. You can make sure your version of events spreads. You can position yourself as the victim, the hero, the reasonable one, depending on who you're talking to. And because no one has the full story, no one can challenge the narrative. You see it in toxic workplaces where a manager confides in certain employees about difficulties with others. Those employees feel valued. They feel like they're seeing the real story. but they're only seeing the version the manager wants them to see. And that version is designed to build allegiance, to isolate targets, to make dissent seem like disloyalty. In personal relationships, it shows up as someone who shares different struggles with different friends, carefully tailoring what each person hears to maintain sympathy and support. No one realizes they're being managed because the disclosures feel so personal, so vulnerable. But vulnerability can be a strategy, and intimacy can be a weapon. The danger is that selective disclosure is almost impossible to detect from the inside. When someone shares something private with you, your instinct isn't to wonder what they're hiding or who else they're telling. Your instinct is to feel trusted. And that instinct is exactly what makes the manipulation work. Social currency. Information isn't just power, it's currency. You trade it, you spend it, you save it for when you need it. And like any currency, its value depends on scarcity. The more people who have it, the less it's worth. The fewer people who know, the more valuable it becomes. Social currency is what keeps gossip networks alive. People don't share information out of generosity. They share it because it buys them something. Attention, status, connection, influence. Influence. Every time you tell someone something they didn't know, you're making a transaction. You're offering value. And in return, you get value back. Maybe it's their own piece of information. Maybe it's their time, their loyalty, their attention. But it's always an exchange. The psychology is straightforward. Having information others don't have makes you important. It makes people come to you. It gives you something to offer when you need social capital. And in environments where formal power is limited, social currency becomes the primary way to accumulate influence. You see it at work when someone who's not in leadership still holds sway because they know things. They hear about decisions early. They understand the politics. And people cultivate relationships with them, not because they like them, but because they want access to what they know. In friend groups, it's the person who always has the latest update, the inside scoop, the story no one else has heard yet. They're not necessarily the closest friend, but they're valuable. What makes social currency dangerous is that it incentivizes hoarding and selective sharing. If information is valuable because it's scarce, then keeping it scarce maintains your value. You don't tell everyone. You tell the right people at the right time. You hold back just enough to make sure people keep coming to you. And that creates an environment where transparency becomes a liability and secrecy becomes strategy. The other problem is that social currency inflates gossip. If the value of information depends on how interesting it is, then there's pressure to make it interesting. A boring truth doesn't trade well. So the truth gets embellished. Details get added. Speculation gets presented as fact. And the gossip network, built on the exchange of information, starts circulating distortions because distortions are worth more than accuracy. Over time, the people who treat information as currency stop seeing it as something that might affect real people. It's just a commodity, something to trade, and the damage it causes becomes secondary to the value it provides. Attention-bait gossip. You won't believe what I just heard. The pause. The lean in. The lowered voice. You're hooked before a single detail drops. And that's the point. Attention-bait gossip isn't about the information. It's about the attention. About being the center of the moment. About making people lean in and listen. The structure is deliberate. Start with a tease. Build anticipation. Drop the information slowly, piece by piece, maintaining control of the conversation. The person sharing it doesn't just want to inform you. They want to be the one everyone's focused on. And gossip, with its built-in intrigue, is the perfect vehicle. The need driving it is simple. Some people crave attention. And in social settings, gossip is one of the most reliable ways to get it. It doesn't require talent or achievement. It just requires access to a story, real or exaggerated, that other people want to hear. And the more dramatic the story, the more attention it generates. You see it in the person who always has the wildest update, the most shocking revelation, the most unbelievable detail. Their stories might be true, or they might be inflated, but they're always designed to maximize impact, because the goal isn't accuracy. The goal is reaction, gaps, questions, eyes on them. In groups, attention bait gossip disrupts natural conversation. Everything flows normally until someone drops a piece of gossip so provocative that it hijacks the entire dynamic. Suddenly, all focus shifts. Everyone stops what they were doing to hear the story, and the person who brought it gets exactly what they wanted. Control. Centrality. The feeling of being the most important person in the room, if only for a few minutes. The problem is that attention bait gossip corrodes trust. When people realize someone is using gossip primarily for attention, they start questioning everything that person says. Are they sharing because it's true? Or because it makes for a good story? And once that doubt sets in, even legitimate information from them becomes suspect. But for the person doing it, that risk is worth it. Because the alternative, being ignored, feels worse than being doubted. And as long as the gossip keeps generating attention, they'll keep using it, regardless of the damage it does to their credibility or to the people they're talking about. Envy-driven gossip. She got the promotion, the one you wanted, the one you thought you deserved, and now every conversation about her feels different. You're not celebrating, you're analyzing, looking for flaws, sharing observations that frame her success as luck, as favoritism, as anything but merit. Envy-driven gossip doesn't always announce itself. It hides behind concern, behind fairness, behind legitimate critique. But underneath, it's resentment looking for an outlet. When someone has something you want, whether it's a job, a relationship, recognition, or status, gossip becomes a way to level the field. If you can't have what they have, you can at least diminish it. The mechanism is subtle. You don't say you're jealous. You say you're worried. I just don't think she's ready for that role. You don't admit resentment. You frame it as observation. It's strange how quickly she moved up. Each comment plants doubt. Each observation suggests that their success isn't quite deserved. And over time, those whispers accumulate, quietly eroding their standing. In workplaces, envy-driven gossip targets people who get promoted, who get praised, who get opportunities. The gossip focuses on questions. Did they really earn it? Who did they know? What shortcuts did they take? The goal isn't to uncover truth. The goal is to create suspicion. To make sure their success comes with an asterisk. In social settings, it shows up when someone's relationship, appearance, achievement, or lifestyle generates envy. The gossip doesn't attack directly. It insinuates. I heard things aren't actually that great between them. She probably can't afford that. I wonder what she's compensating for. The comments are small, but they're designed to bring the person down, to make their good fortune seem less legitimate, less inviolable. What makes envy-driven gossip insidious is that it feels justified to the person doing it. They're not being petty. They're being realistic. They're just pointing out what everyone's thinking. But what everyone's thinking is often shaped by the gossip itself. The envy creates the narrative. The narrative creates the perception. And the perception justifies more gossip. The damage isn't just to the target. It's to the person spreading it. Envy-driven gossip keeps you focused on what others have instead of what you're building. It traps you in comparison. And the more you tear others down through gossip, the less energy you have to actually pursue what you want. Virtue gossip. I can't believe she said that. Don't people know better by now? The judgment is swift. The moral clarity absolute. And the gossip spreads not as information, but as righteousness. As proof that you're on the right side. That you see what's wrong. That you care about what matters. Virtue gossip positions the person spreading it as morally superior. It's not just sharing news. It's demonstrating values, showing that you notice when others fail to meet standards, and in the process elevating yourself as someone who would never make that mistake, never cross that line, never fall short the way they did. The appeal is powerful. Gossip usually carries guilt, but virtue gossip feels clean. You're not being petty. You're holding people accountable. You're educating others. You're protecting the community. The moral framing transforms gossip from something selfish into something noble. And that permission structure makes it easier to spread and harder to challenge. In progressive communities, it shows up as calling out problematic behavior. Someone makes a misstep, and the gossip network activates, not just to inform but to signal disapproval. Each retelling reinforces the collective judgment. Each conversation confirms who's aligned with the right values and who isn't. The gossip becomes a test. If you don't participate, if you don't share the outrage, your own values become suspect. In religious or tight-knit communities, virtue gossip focuses on moral failures. Who's breaking the rules? Who's straying from the path? Who's setting a bad example? The gossip is framed as concern for the community's integrity. But it also serves to police boundaries, to remind everyone what happens when you step out of line, to reinforce hierarchy and belonging. What makes virtue gossip particularly effective is that it's self-justifying. If someone pushes back, if they suggest the gossip is excessive or unfair, they get framed as defending the wrong behavior. The gossip becomes untouchable because criticizing it means criticizing the values it claims to uphold. And most people won't risk that association. But virtue gossip often does more harm than the behavior it's condemning. It turns mistakes into scandals. It denies people the chance to learn or change. It creates an environment where everyone's terrified of stepping wrong, not because they care about doing right, but because they know one misstep will be broadcast and analyzed and used as proof of their character. And in that environment, actual growth becomes impossible. All that's left is performance. Norm enforcement via gossip. Nobody posted the rules. There's no handbook. No official guidelines. But everyone knows them anyway. How? Because the moment someone steps out of line, the conversations start. And those conversations don't just comment on the violation. They enforce the boundary. Gossip is how communities regulate behavior when formal authority is absent or insufficient. Someone does something that violates an unwritten norm. Maybe they're too loud, too ambitious, too different. And the group responds, not with rules or punishment, but with talk. Observations shared, judgments passed, distance created, the message spreads, and the person either adjusts or gets pushed to the margins. The enforcement happens in layers. First, the gossip identifies the violation. Did you see what she wore to that meeting? The comment isn't neutral. It's marking the behavior as wrong. Then it circulates. The same observation gets repeated across multiple conversations, each time reinforcing that this isn't acceptable. And finally, it creates consequences. People start treating the violator differently. Colder, more distant, less willing to include them. What makes this form of enforcement powerful is that it doesn't require consensus. It doesn't need a vote or a formal decision. It just needs enough people talking. And once the talk reaches critical mass, the norm is enforced whether anyone intended it or not. The person who violated it feels the shift. They adjust their behavior, and the group never has to acknowledge what just happened. In offices, norm enforcement through gossip shapes everything from dress codes to work hours to communication styles. Someone leaves at 5 every day. The gossip starts. Must be nice to have such flexible hours. The comment isn't about policy. It's about expectations. And the more people repeat it, the more it becomes clear staying late is the norm here, even if no one's officially required to. In social groups, gossip enforces norms around relationships, parenting, spending values. Someone makes a choice that deviates from the group standard, and the gossip machine activates. Not to punish, just to remind everyone where the lines are. And most people, feeling that pressure, pull back into compliance without ever being told directly. Reputation policing. You built something. A reputation. Years of showing up, doing the work, being reliable. And then one story starts circulating. One mistake. One misunderstanding. One piece of gossip that doesn't match the reputation you've earned. And suddenly people are watching. Waiting. Policing. Reputation policing is the process by which gossip monitors and tests whether someone still deserves their standing. It's not enough to have a good reputation. You have to maintain it, and gossip is the surveillance system that makes sure you do. Every action gets scrutinized. Every choice gets interpreted. And if something doesn't fit the expected pattern, the gossip starts asking questions. The scrutiny intensifies with status. The higher your reputation, the more people pay attention. A minor slip from someone with no standing gets ignored. The same slip from someone with a strong reputation becomes news. The gossip spreads faster. The interpretations get harsher, because there's a psychological satisfaction in watching someone with a good reputation stumble. It confirms that they're human, that the pedestal wasn't quite deserved. In professional settings, reputation policing shows up when someone respected makes a mistake, a missed deadline, a poor presentation, a bad decision. Under normal circumstances, these might be overlooked, but because the person has built a reputation for excellence, the gossip amplifies it. I thought they were supposed to be so good at this. The comment isn't just about the mistake. It's about whether they still deserve their reputation. In communities, it happens when someone known for certain values acts in ways that seem contradictory. The environmentalist who drives a gas car. The advocate for work-life balance who works weekends. The gossip doesn't just note the inconsistency. It questions the entire reputation. Maybe they were never as committed as they seemed. What makes reputation policing exhausting is that it never stops. Once you have a reputation, every action is evaluated against it. You can't have an off day. You can't make a mistake without it being analyzed as a potential crack in the image. And the gossip network, always watching, makes sure that any deviation gets noticed and discussed. The paradox is that reputation policing claims to enforce authenticity, but often just enforces performance. People stop taking risks. Stop being human. Stop showing vulnerability. Because they know that anything that doesn't match their established image will be turned into gossip. And the cost of being caught in that gossip feels higher than the cost of never stepping out of the carefully maintained persona. Third-party relational damage. Two people have a conflict. They argue. They disagree. But the conflict stays between them. Or it should. Except it doesn't. Because someone else heard about it. And they told someone. Who told someone else. And now the conflict that started between two people has damaged relationships with a dozen others who were never involved. This is third-party relational damage, when gossip about a conflict spreads beyond the people directly involved and poisons relationships that had nothing to do with the original issue. The damage isn't intentional, it's structural. Gossip doesn't stay contained. And as it spreads, it forces people to take sides, form opinions, adjust how they interact with everyone connected to the conflict. The mechanism is simple. Person A and Person B have a disagreement. Person A vents to Person C. Person C now has information that changes how they see Person B, even though Person B did nothing to Person C. Person C might pull back, might treat Person B differently, might share the story with Person D. And with each retelling, more relationships get affected. The original conflict becomes a network event. You see it in families when two siblings fight and suddenly cousins, parents, aunts, and uncles are picking sides based on second-hand accounts. The people taking sides weren't there. They don't have the full story, but they have enough gossip to form an opinion. And those opinions create distance, awkwardness, fractured relationships that outlast the original fight. In workplaces, a disagreement between two colleagues becomes gossip that reeks their entire teams. Now people who work with both of them feel pressure to navigate the tension, to be careful about what they say, to avoid being seen as aligned with the wrong person. The conflict, which might have been resolvable between the two people involved, becomes a political minefield because the gossip turned it into a public issue. What makes third-party relational damage so destructive is that the people suffering it often don't know it's happening. They don't realize their relationship with someone has shifted because of gossip about a conflict they weren't part of. They just notice the distance, the coldness, the change in how they're treated, and by the time they figure out what caused it, the damage is already done. Group bonding through gossip. They're laughing, leaning in, sharing stories about someone who's not there. And in that moment, they're not just talking. They're bonding, building connection, creating intimacy through the shared act of dissecting someone else's life. Group bonding through gossip is one of the most common and least examined functions of social talk. People don't gossip just to spread information or enforce norms. They gossip to connect, to find common ground, to establish trust through shared observations and judgments. And it works. Gossip creates closeness even when the content is destructive. The psychology is straightforward. When two people gossip together, they're creating a shared reality. They're agreeing on how to interpret someone's behavior. They're aligning their perspectives. And that alignment feels like intimacy. It feels like understanding, like being on the same team. The person they're gossiping about becomes the outside reference point that pulls them together. In new friendships, gossip often accelerates bonding. Two people who don't know each other well find a mutual acquaintance to discuss. Maybe they share frustrations. Maybe they swap observations. And suddenly, they're not strangers anymore. They're people who see the world the same way. The gossip gave them a shortcut to connection. In established groups, gossip reinforces cohesion. When everyone's talking about the same person, sharing the same judgments, they're confirming their membership. They're participating in the group's collective sense-making. And that participation strengthens their place in the group. The gossip becomes the glue. But the bonding comes at a cost. The relationships built on gossip are often fragile. Because if the group bonds by talking about outsiders, what happens when you're not there? The same mechanism that created closeness when you were part of the conversation can create exclusion when you're the subject of it. And that creates a culture where everyone's bonding over gossip, but no one fully trusts each other. The other problem is that group bonding through gossip trains people to connect through negativity. Instead of building relationships on shared interests, values, or experiences, they build them on shared judgments. And over time, that becomes the default mode of interaction. The group can't bond without having someone to talk about. And that dependency makes the relationships hollow. Social comparison gossip. Did you hear she's moving to a bigger place? The question sounds neutral, curious, even. But it's not. It's the beginning of a comparison, a measurement, a way to figure out where you stand by analyzing where someone else has landed. Social comparison gossip is driven by the need to evaluate yourself relative to others. You can't always measure success, status, or worth in absolute terms. So you measure it in relative terms. And gossip is the tool. It provides the data points, the updates on who's doing what, who's moving up, who's falling behind. And with each piece of information, you recalibrate your sense of where you fit. The comparisons happen unconsciously. Someone mentions a colleague's promotion. You automatically think about your own career trajectory. Someone talks about a friend's relationship. You evaluate your own. the gossip isn't just about them. It's about you. About whether you're ahead or behind. Whether you're doing enough. Whether you're falling short. What makes social comparison gossip persistent is that it feeds on insecurity. The less certain you are about your own standing, the more you need external reference points. And gossip provides them constantly. A steady stream of information about everyone else's wins, losses, choices, and outcomes. Each piece of gossip becomes a mirror, reflecting not what they're doing, but what you're not. In competitive environments, workplaces, schools, social circles where status matters, social comparison gossip is constant. Who got the better offer? Who's dating someone impressive? Who bought what? Who went where? The details aren't just interesting, they're measuring sticks. And the conversations, though framed as casual updates, are actually anxiety management. Ways to assess whether you're keeping up. The damage isn't just in the comparisons themselves. It's in how they shape behavior. When gossip is your primary source of comparison data, you start optimizing for what gets talked about. You make choices based on how they'll look in gossip, rather than what actually serves you. You chase the promotions, relationships, acquisitions that will position you well in other people's conversations. And in the process, you lose track of what you actually want. Humiliation narratives. The story gets told, and retold again. Each time it's the same moment, the same mistake, the same embarrassment, and each time it's shared, the humiliation gets reinforced. Not just remembered, embedded. Turned into a defining story that follows someone long after the moment itself has passed. Humiliation narratives are gossip's cruelest form. They take a single moment of vulnerability, failure, or embarrassment and turn it into a permanent label. The person at the center becomes known for that one thing, that one slip, that one bad day. And no matter what else they do, the story keeps circulating, ensuring that the humiliation never fully fades. The power of these narratives is in their stickiness. Positive stories fade. Achievements get forgotten. But embarrassment, that stays. Because it's more interesting, more memorable, more shareable, and gossip networks keep it alive, passing it along to new people who weren't even there, ensuring that the humiliation reaches audiences the original moment never touched. In schools, it's the kid who did something awkward in middle school and still hears about it in high school. In workplaces, it's the person who made a major mistake in their first year and, years later, still gets referenced as the one who. The narrative becomes shortened, a way to categorize them. And every time it gets repeated, it denies them the chance to be seen as anything else. What makes humiliation narratives particularly cruel is that the person can't escape them through behavior. They can't undo the moment. They can't prove it's not who they are, because the gossip doesn't care about growth or change. It cares about the story, and the story, once established, becomes the truth people remember, regardless of the reality. The people spreading humiliation narratives often don't see the harm. They're just recounting something that happened. Just sharing a funny story. Just giving context. But each retelling cements the humiliation. Each laugh at the story reinforces the idea that this moment defines the person. And the cumulative weight of all those retellings creates a reputation that's nearly impossible to shed. Curiosity gossip. Why do people want to know? Not because the information matters. Not because it affects them. Just because it's there. Because someone else knows. Because the not knowing feels like being left out. Curiosity gossip isn't driven by malice or strategy. It's driven by the simple, relentless urge to know what's happening. Who's dating? Who's leaving? Who said what? The details don't need to be important. They just need to be unknown. And the moment something is hidden or private, it becomes interesting. The psychology is basic. Humans are wired to seek information. In evolutionary terms, knowing what others were doing helped with survival. Who's allied with whom? Who's a threat? Who has resources? That drive doesn't disappear in modern life. It just takes to different targets. Now it's who's getting promoted. Who's having problems? Who's moving? The stakes are lower, but the compulsion is the same. What makes curiosity gossip pervasive is that it feels harmless. You're not trying to hurt anyone. You're just curious, just asking, just catching up. And because the intent isn't malicious, the gossip spreads without guilt. People share freely because they don't see the damage. They're just satisfying curiosity. Theirs and everyone else's. But curiosity gossip still invades privacy, still exposes things that weren't meant to be shared. A relationship status, a health issue, a family problem. The person whose life is being discussed didn't consent to becoming the subject of group curiosity. But once the information is out, curiosity ensures it spreads. Not because anyone wants to cause harm, just because people want to know. And the more private the information, the stronger the pull. Gossip about public achievements is interesting. Gossip about private struggles is magnetic, because it feels like access, like being on the inside, like knowing something you're not supposed to know. And that feeling, that small thrill of insider knowledge, is enough to keep curiosity gossip circulating endlessly. Moral outrage sharing. Someone did something wrong, unquestionably wrong, and the moment you hear about it, you feel it. Anger, disgust, the need to tell someone, not just to inform them, to share the feeling, to confirm that you're not alone in seeing how unacceptable this is. Moral outrage sharing is gossip fueled by collective indignation. It spreads because the emotional reaction demands an outlet. You can't just sit with the anger. You need to express it. And the most immediate way to do that is to tell others. To share the story. To see if they react the way you did. And when they do, when they mirror your outrage, it validates both the feeling and the bond between you. The mechanism is social. Outrage isolates when it's private, but when shared it connects. Suddenly you're not just angry. You're part of a group that's angry together. And that shared emotion creates solidarity. You're aligned in your values, in your judgment, in your sense of what's acceptable. The gossip isn't just spreading information. It's building a moral community. In online spaces, moral outrage sharing moves at lightning speed. A screenshot, a quote, a video. Within minutes, thousands of people are sharing the same story, expressing the same anger, reinforcing the same judgment. The gossip doesn't need verification. The outrage is the point. And each share amplifies it, creating a wave that feels like collective action even when nothing is actually being done. In personal networks, it shows up when someone violates a shared value. Cheating, lying, betrayal, discrimination. The gossip spreads not neutral information but as a moral verdict. And the speed of spread reflects the intensity of the violation. The worse the behavior, the faster the gossip moves. Because the outrage needs to be shared, needs to be validated, needs to become collective. The problem is that moral outrage sharing doesn't always wait for context. The initial reaction is so strong that it bypasses verification. The story spreads based on how it feels, not whether it's accurate. And once the outrage is collective, once hundreds or thousands of people are sharing it, correcting it becomes almost impossible. The emotion has already done its work, the judgment is set, and the gossip, even if based on incomplete or false information, has already caused its damage. Status leveling gossip. Watch what happens when someone rises too fast. When they get the promotion everyone wanted. When they achieve something that makes them stand out, the congratulations are there. But so is something else. Whispers. Observations. Small comments that don't quite celebrate. That subtly bring them back down. Status leveling gossip operates on the principle that hierarchies need to be kept in check. When someone moves too far above the the group unconsciously works to pull them back. Not through confrontation, through talk. Through gossip that questions, undermines, reframes their success as something less deserved, less impressive, less threatening. It shows up as analysis of how they got there. Well, they knew the right people. As skepticism about whether they're ready. I'm not sure they have the experience for that role. As reminders of their flaws. They're good at presenting, but the actual work. Each comment is small. Reasonable even. But together they form a pattern. A collective effort to make sure the person doesn't get too far ahead. The psychology behind it is complicated. Part of it is envy. Seeing someone succeed where you haven't creates discomfort. And gossip becomes a way to manage that discomfort. If their success is questioned, it feels less threatening. Part of it is fairness. Groups have an instinctive sense of equity. When someone rises too quickly, it feels like the system is broken. And gossip becomes the informal correction mechanism. But status-leveling gossip also serves a social function. It maintains cohesion. Groups bond over shared standing. When one person pulls too far ahead, it disrupts that bond. The gossip, by bringing them back down, restores balance. It reminds everyone, including the person who succeeded, that they're still part of the group. Still subject to the group's judgment. Still accountable to the collective. What makes it insidious is that it's framed as care. I'm just worried they're moving too fast. As realism, I'm just being honest about their limitation. But underneath, it's regulation. It's the group asserting control over individual success. And for the person being leveled, it's a clear message: you can rise, but not too much. Not in a way that threatens the group's equilibrium. Confidentiality breach. This stays between us. The words hang there. A promise. A boundary. And you mean it when you agree. But then a conversation happens. A close friend. A partner. Someone you trust. And you share it. Just with them. Just this once. Because it feels safe. Because they won't tell anyone. Except they do. To someone they trust. Who tells someone they trust? And within days, the thing that was supposed to stay private is circulating through a network of people who all promised not to tell. The original confidentiality is broken. Not by malice. By incremental breaks that each felt justified in the moment. Confidentiality breach through gossip happens because people misjudge trust boundaries. When someone tells you something private, you feel the weight of that trust. But you also feel the weight of your own close relationships. And when those relationships ask for openness, for sharing, the boundary weakens. You tell yourself it's okay because the person you're telling is trustworthy. Because they won't spread it further. But trust doesn't create containment. It creates permission. And the person you told makes the same calculation with someone they trust. And the breach cascades. In workplaces, confidentiality breaks destroy careers. A manager shares concerns about an employee's performance with a trusted colleague. That colleague mentions it to their own team in confidence. Someone on that team tells a friend. And suddenly the entire office knows. The employee, who was never meant to hear any of this, becomes aware that their struggles are public knowledge. And the manager who started the chain has no idea how far it spread. In friendships, confidentiality breaks fracture trust permanently. Someone shares a personal struggle, asks for discretion, and the person they told respects that mostly. They don't broadcast it. They just tell their partner, their best friend, someone who won't say anything, but those people tell others. And eventually, the original person finds out that their private pain became group knowledge. And the relationship that felt safe no longer does. What makes confidentiality breaks particularly damaging is that they're rarely intentional. The person who first broke confidence didn't mean to cause harm. They just underestimated how far information travels once it's shared. And by the time the damage is visible, the chain of breaks, is so long that no one can trace it back to the source. All that's left is broken trust and information that can't be taken back. Plausible gossiping. I don't know if this is true, but I heard. The disclaimer is there. Right at the front. A shield. A way to share information without owning it. Without taking responsibility for whether it's accurate. Because if it turns out to be false, you can always say you weren't sure. You were just passing along what you heard. Plausible gossiping is the art of spreading rumors while maintaining deniability. The person sharing doesn't commit to the truth of what they're saying. They frame it as a question, as something they heard, as speculation, and that framing gives them cover. They're not making an accusation. They're not stating a fact. They're just wondering out loud. Just sharing what's been said. Just asking if anyone else has heard the same thing. The technique is deliberate. By hedging the information, the gossiper avoids accountability. If the information damages someone's reputation, the gossiper can claim they were just repeating what they heard, not confirming it. If the information turns out to be false, they can say they never believed it themselves. They were just curious, just trying to figure out what's true. And that plausible deniability protects them while the gossip does its work. You see it everywhere. I'm not saying this is what happened, but people are saying, the passive construction shifts responsibility. It's not the gossiper's claim. It's what people are saying. And once framed that way, the gossip spreads without anyone having to own it. Each person who repeats it adds their own disclaimer, their own hedge, and the rumor circulates, growing in reach and impact, while everyone involved maintains they were just asking questions. In professional settings, plausible gossiping shows up as careful speculation. I've heard there might be layoffs. I don't know for sure, but that's the word. The person sharing isn't confirming anything, but the information, even unconfirmed, creates anxiety, changes behavior, influences decisions. And if the layoffs never happen, the person who spread the rumor can say they were just repeating what they heard. They never said it was definite. What makes plausible gossiping effective is that it exploits the gap between spreading information and being held accountable for it. The gossip gets the benefits of sharing, connection, influence, without the risks of being wrong. And the targets of the gossip suffer the consequences whether the information is true or not, because once it's circulating, the damage is done. Ambiguous smearing. She didn't say anything specific, just raised her eyebrows, made a face, said, well, you know how he is, and you don't, actually. You don't know, but now you think you should. Now you're wondering what she meant, what everyone else apparently knows, what you're missing. Ambiguous smearing is character damage through implication rather than accusation. It works by suggesting problems without naming them. By hinting at flaws without specifying what they are, the ambiguity makes it powerful. Because when someone implies there's an issue without saying what it is, your imagination fills in the gaps. And what you imagine is often worse than what they would have said directly. The tactic is subtle. Instead of, he's unreliable, it's, let's just say I wouldn't count on him. Instead of, she has a temper, it's, you'll see. The vagueness prevents challenge. You can't defend against an accusation that was never made. You can't correct a misunderstanding when the understanding was never clarified. All you can do is notice the shift, the slight distance, the knowing looks that suggest everyone else is in on something you're not. In groups, ambiguous smearing shows up as coded language. Eye rolls. Tone shifts. Comments like, interesting choice, or if that's what works for them. The words seem neutral, but the delivery isn't, and the listener picks up the subtext. Something's wrong with this person. Something the group has collectively noticed. Something that doesn't need to be spelled out because everyone already knows. What makes this form of gossip particularly cruel is that it's almost impossible to address. If you ask what the problem is, you get deflection. No problem. Why would you think there's a problem? But the implications keep coming. The suggestions. The looks. The carefully worded observations that never quite cross into direct criticism, but leave no doubt that criticism is there. For the target, ambiguous smearing is maddening. You know something's being said. You can feel the shift in how people treat you. But you can't pin it down. Can't confront it. Can't defend yourself. Because the smearing never takes a form solid enough to challenge. It just hovers. A cloud of implication that follows you. That colors how others see you. That damages your reputation without ever giving you the chance to set the record straight. Social sanction gossip. You crossed a line. Maybe you didn't know it was there. Maybe you thought it wouldn't matter. But it did. And now people are talking. Not to you. About you. And every conversation confirms the same thing: you're out of bounds. And the group is making sure you know it. Social sanction gossip is how communities punish without formal systems. When someone violates a norm, breaks an unwritten rule, or steps outside acceptable behavior, the group responds with talk. Not loud. Not confrontational. Just persistent. Observations shared. Judgments passed. Distance created. The gossip becomes the punishment. The power lies in its invisibility. There's no trial. No official accusation. Just a shift in how people treat you. Conversations that stop when you approach. Invitations that don't come. Interactions that feel colder, shorter, more careful. And if you ask what's wrong, the answers are vague. Nothing. Why? But the chill remains. And the gossip that caused it keeps circulating. It works because it's collective. One person's judgment might be ignored. But when multiple people share the same observation, when the gossip spreads across the network, it becomes a consensus. And that consensus carries weight. The group has decided you violated something. And the gossip is how they enforce the consequence. In tight-knit communities, social sanction gossip regulates everything from how you dress to how you parent to what you say. Step outside the norm, and the talk starts. Not loud enough to confront, just loud enough to make sure everyone knows. And the pressure to conform isn't stated. It's felt, in the looks, the distance, the subtle exclusion that gossip creates. The cruelty is that you often can't fix it. Because the sanction isn't about what you did. It's about the group asserting its power to define acceptable behavior. And even if you change, even if you adjust, the gossip lingers. Because it was never just about the violation. It was about reminding everyone, including you, that the group decides the rules. Identity policing. She's always been the responsible one. The one who shows up. The one who handles things. And then one day, she doesn't. She cancels. She says no. She prioritizes something else. And immediately the comments start. That's not like her. I wonder what's going on. She used to be so reliable. Oh, identity policing is gossip that enforces who someone is allowed to be. It monitors behavior not just for rule violations, but for consistency with assigned identity. The group has decided you're the responsible one. The fun one, the serious one, the creative one. And when you act outside that box, the gossip activates. Not to inform. To correct. To remind you that deviating from your assigned role disrupts the group's understanding of who you are. The mechanism is subtle. The gossip doesn't directly tell you to change. It just observes, notes the inconsistency, questions it, and in doing so creates pressure, because no one wants to be the subject of group confusion. No one wants to be the person everyone's trying to figure out, so you adjust. You pull back into the familiar role. You become predictable, again. And the gossip stops. You see it in families where someone tries to break from their assigned position. The screw-up tries to get serious. The caretaker tries to set boundaries. The quiet one tries to speak up. And immediately the family gossip responds. Not with support, with skepticism. Since when do they care about that? The gossip doesn't celebrate growth. It questions deviation. In workplaces, identity policing shows up when someone tries to expand their role. The detail person tries strategy. The creative tries process. And the gossip network reacts. I don't think that's really their strength. The comments aren't about competence. They're about identity. About keeping people in the boxes that make the organization's structure feel stable. What makes identity policing exhausting is that it punishes growth. Every time you try to change, to develop, to become something more than the role you've been assigned, the gossip pulls you back. And over time, you stop trying. Not because you don't want to change, but because the cost of fighting the group's need for you to stay the same feels too high. Suspicion gossip. Something feels off. You can't point to anything concrete. Just a sense. A vibe. And instead of dismissing it, you mention it. To a friend. To a colleague. Have you noticed anything weird about them? And suddenly, you're both paying attention. Looking for signs. Interpreting behavior through the lens of suspicion. And whether or not anything's actually wrong, the suspicion spreads. Suspicion gossip starts with doubt and builds towards certainty through collective observation. One person's hunch becomes 2 people's theory becomes 5 people's conviction. Not because evidence accumulates, but because the act of sharing suspicion makes it feel more legitimate. If multiple people are suspicious, surely there's something to be suspicious about. The psychology is simple. Suspicion activates pattern seeking. Once you're looking for something wrong, you find it. Normal behavior gets reinterpreted as suspicious. A change in routine becomes evidence of hiding something. A mood shift becomes proof of guilt. And every observation, when shared through gossip, reinforces the original suspicion. In relationships, suspicion gossip destroys trust before anything's actually happened. A friend mentions they think their partner might be cheating. They share small observations. Late nights. Changed passwords. Distance. The friend group starts watching, analyzing. And with each conversation, the suspicion hardens. The partner, who might be completely innocent, is now under surveillance. And the relationship, whether it was in trouble or not, is now damaged by collective suspicion. At work, suspicion gossip targets people based on minimal evidence. Someone's been taking long lunches. Seems distracted. The gossip starts. I wonder if they're job hunting. Maybe they're having problems at home. The speculation spreads. And soon managers are treating the person differently based not on facts, but on shared suspicion that started from nothing. What makes suspicion gossip dangerous is that it creates self-fulfilling prophecies. Once enough people are suspicious, the target feels it. They notice the looks, the questions, the changed treatment, and they respond. They become defensive, withdrawn, careful. And that behavior caused by the suspicion itself becomes proof that the suspicion was justified. Intimacy testing via gossip. She tells you something she's never told anyone else. And in that moment you feel it. The weight of trust. The closeness. The sense that this relationship just deepened. But what you don't realize is that this might be a test. A way to see if you'll keep it private. Or if you'll share it. And how you handle the information determines whether the intimacy was real. Intimacy testing via gossip is the practice of sharing selective information to gauge trust and loyalty. The person tells you something personal. Not necessarily their deepest secret, but something meaningful enough that sharing it represents vulnerability. And then they wait. They watch. They see if it stays between you, or if it makes its way back through the gossip network. The test works because it's invisible. You don't know you're being tested. You just know someone trusted you. And if you value the relationship, you keep the confidence. But if you don't, If you mention it to someone else, if you let it slip in conversation, the information travels. And the person who originally shared it finds out. Not because you told them, because the gossip network told them. And in that moment, they know you failed the test. In new friendships, intimacy testing happens early. Someone shares a struggle, a fear, a private opinion, and then they monitor. If the information stays contained, the friendship deepens. If it leaks, the person pulls back. Not dramatically, just enough to protect themselves from further disclosure. The friendship continues, but it never gets closer, because trust was tested and found wanting. In professional relationships, intimacy testing determines who's safe to confide in. A manager shares concerns about the team with someone they're considering promoting. Not to get advice, to see if it stays private. If it does, the person becomes trusted, part of the inner circle. If it doesn't, if the concerns become gossip, the manager knows. This person can't be trusted with sensitive information, and their trajectory in the organization shifts accordingly. The trap is that intimacy testing creates a culture of surveillance. People stop sharing authentically because they're always wondering if this is a test. They become careful, guarded, and genuine intimacy, which requires vulnerability without calculation, becomes impossible. What's left is performance. Everyone testing everyone else through gossip, and no one fully trusting anyone. Loyalty signaling gossip. Did you hear what she said about us? The question comes from your closest friend, and immediately you feel it. The pull to respond, to confirm your loyalty, to show that you're on their side. And the easiest way to do that: share something about the person who criticized them. Show through gossip that you stand with your friend against the outsider. Loyalty signaling gossip is how people demonstrate allegiance by participating in talk about a common target. It's not about the information. It's about the act of sharing it. About showing that you're aligned, that you see the world the same way, that when sides are drawn, you're on the right one. The mechanism is social. When someone shares negative gossip about a third party, they're making an offer. Join me in this judgment. Agree with this assessment. And if you accept, if you contribute your own observations, your own criticisms, you've signaled loyalty. You've shown that their enemies are your enemies. Their grievances are your grievances. The gossip becomes the proof of the bond. You see it in groups under threat. When there's conflict, when boundaries are being tested, gossip about the opposition intensifies. It's not just about the other side. It's about reinforcing internal cohesion. Every piece of gossip shared about them strengthens the sense of us. And participating in that gossip signals you're committed to the group. In workplaces, loyalty signaling happens when departments compete. When teams clash. When there's tension between leaders. People gossip about the other side not just to spread information but to show which side they're on. A comment about another team's dysfunction. An observation about a rival's incompetence. Each piece of gossip is a loyalty declaration. In personal conflicts, it's more direct. Two friends have a falling out, and the people around them face pressure to pick sides. The gossip they participate in signals their choice. If you share criticisms of one friend, you've sided with the other. If you stay neutral, if you refuse to gossip, you've signaled something else. That you're not fully committed. That your loyalty is divided. And in high-stakes conflicts, that ambiguity itself becomes suspicious. What makes loyalty signaling through gossip toxic is that it escalates conflicts. Because the goal isn't truth or resolution. It's demonstration of allegiance. So the gossip gets harsher, more extreme, more damaging, not because the information justifies it, but because stronger gossip signals stronger loyalty. And in a system where loyalty is constantly being tested through talk, the gossip spirals beyond what the original conflict ever warranted. Revenge gossip. They hurt you. betrayed you, humiliated you, and you can't get it back them directly. Maybe they're too powerful. Maybe the relationship makes confrontation impossible. Maybe you just don't want the fight. But you want them to pay. And gossip gives you the tool. Revenge gossip is retribution through reputation damage. It's the deliberate spread of information, true or exaggerated, designed to make someone suffer the way they made you suffer. You can't hurt them directly, but you can hurt how others see them. You can damage their standing. You can make sure their reputation carries the weight of what they did to you. The strategy is calculated. You don't spread the gossip everywhere at once. You start with trusted allies, people who will believe you, people who will sympathize, and you share the story, what they did, how it affected you, the details that make them look worst. And then you wait. Let the gossip do its work. Let it spread through networks you're not even part of. Let it reach people who don't know you but will remember the story. In toxic breakups, revenge gossip is common. One person shares their version of why it ended, the other person's flaws, their mistakes, the ways they failed, and that version spreads through mutual friends, through social circles, through anyone willing to listen. The gossip becomes the record, the narrative that defines the relationship for everyone outside it. And the other person, often caught off guard, finds their reputation reshaped by gossip they can't control. In professional betrayals, revenge gossip shows up after firings, demotions, or conflicts. Someone feels wronged, and they share their perspective widely, not just with close colleagues but with anyone in the industry willing to hear it. The gossip damages the other person's professional reputation, makes future opportunities harder, creates a trail that follows them. All because someone wanted revenge and gossip was the available weapon. What makes revenge gossip particularly destructive is that it's designed to outlast the original hurt. The person spreading it isn't looking for resolution. They're looking for lasting damage. And gossip, once it spreads far enough, becomes permanent. The story gets retold. The reputation shifts. And years later, people who never met the target still remember the gossip, still hold the impression created by someone seeking revenge. Celebrity gossip psychology. Why do we care? They don't know us. We'll never meet them. Their problems don't affect our lives. And yet, when a celebrity's marriage falls apart, when their career crashes, when they're caught in scandal, we talk about it. We analyze it. We share it, as if it matters. Celebrity gossip taps into something fundamental. It gives us access to drama without consequences. We get to watch relationships implode, careers self-destruct, reputations collapse, all from a safe distance. There's no personal risk, no involvement. Just the spectacle. And that makes it endlessly consumable. But it's not just entertainment. Celebrity gossip serves social functions. It gives groups something to bond over. Shared observations. Shared judgments. When everyone's talking about the same scandal, you're part of a collective conversation. You're connected to millions of other people processing the same story. And that connection, however superficial, feels like community. It also provides moral testing grounds. When a celebrity does something controversial, the gossip that follows isn't just about them. It's about us. About what we think is acceptable, what we condemn, what we forgive. The gossip becomes a space where cultural values get debated and reinforced. And by participating, by sharing our take, we're positioning ourselves within those value systems. The psychology gets darker when gossip turns to schadenfreude. There's satisfaction in watching the powerful fall, in seeing beauty fade, in witnessing success collapse. It levels the playing field, at least emotionally. Their problems make our problems feel smaller. Their failures make our lives feel more stable. And the gossip network ensures we don't have to feel guilty about that satisfaction because everyone else is watching too. What makes celebrity gossip particularly sticky is that it's endless. There's always another scandal, another breakup, another downfall. The cycle never stops. And because the subjects are public figures, because their lives are already on display, gossip about them feels permissible. We're not invading privacy. We're just observing what's already public. But the observation, when amplified through gossip, becomes something else. It becomes collective surveillance. A cultural habit of watching, judging, and discussing people we'll never know as if we have the right to their entire lives. Parasocial gossip. You've never met her. She doesn't know you exist. But you follow her life. You know her routines, her struggles, her relationships. And when something happens, when she posts something cryptic or goes quiet for a while, you notice. You wonder. You talk about it with others who follow her too. And in those conversations, it feels like you're discussing a friend. Parasocial gossip is what happens when one-sided relationships generate real emotional investment. The person you're gossiping about isn't in your life. They're on a screen. But the feelings are real. The concern feels genuine. And the gossip that emerges mimics the gossip you'd have about actual friends. Except the person at the center has no idea you're talking about them. The mechanism is simple. Social media creates intimacy without interaction. You see someone's life unfold in real time, their thoughts, their struggles, their celebrations. And your brain processes that exposure as relationship. You start caring, worrying, rooting for them. And when you talk about them with others who follow them, it feels natural. Like catching up about someone you both know. But parasocial gossip is asymmetric. The influencer, the content creator, the public figure they're performing. Sharing selectively. Curating the narrative. You're not seeing their life. You're seeing what they choose to show, and the gossip that forms around that curated content treats performance as reality. Speculation fills in gaps. Assumptions become facts. And an entire narrative gets built around someone who never asked to be known this way. In fan communities, parasocial gossip drives endless analysis. Every post gets dissected. Every absence gets interpreted. Relationships get tracked. Mental health gets diagnosed from a distance. And the community bonds over this shared investment in someone's life. The gossip creates connection, but the connection is built on information the subject never consented to sharing at this depth. What makes parasocial gossip uncomfortable is the entitlement it generates. People feel they have a right to know, a right to weigh in, a right to be updated, and when the subject pulls back, sets boundaries, or contradicts the narrative the gossip has built, the community reacts. Not with understanding, with betrayal, because the relationship, even though it was never real, felt real. And gossip was the language that sustained it. Digital gossip cascade. It starts with one post, a screenshot, a quote taken out of context. Someone shares it, then someone else shares that share. Within an hour, it's everywhere. Thousands of people are talking about it, commenting, adding their takes. And by the time the original person realizes what's happening, the gossip has already shaped how millions of people see them. Digital gossip cascades are different from traditional gossip in speed and scale. What used to take days or weeks to spread through social networks now happens in minutes. One share becomes 10, 10 becomes 100, 100 becomes thousands, and the exponential spread means there's no time to correct, no time to add context, no time to stop it before it becomes the dominant narrative. The psychology behind cascading is momentum. When you see something shared repeatedly, your brain interprets that repetition as importance. If this many people are talking about it, it must matter. And that perception drives more sharing. You don't verify. You don't question. You just add to the cascade because everyone else is. And each share validates the shares that came before. What amplifies digital cascades is the algorithm. Platforms prioritize engagement, and gossip generates engagement, comments, shares, reactions. The more people interact with it, the more the algorithm pushes it to new audiences. The gossip doesn't just spread through social connection. It spreads through automated amplification that rewards outrage, shock, and controversy. The damage happens faster than correction. By the time someone responds, by the time they try to clarify or defend, the cascade has already moved on. People have formed their opinions, made their judgments, and those impressions stick, even if the original gossip was misleading or false. Because correction doesn't cascade the way gossip does. It doesn't generate the same engagement. It doesn't get the same algorithmic boost. So it reaches a fraction of the people who saw the original gossip. And once a digital cascade happens, it leaves a permanent record. The posts stay. The screenshots stay. The gossip becomes searchable. And years later, someone Googling a name finds the cascade, finds the gossip, finds the version of events that spread fastest, not the version that was most accurate. And the digital footprint of that cascade becomes the person's permanent reputation online. Screenshot culture gossip. A private message. A group chat. A moment of vulnerability shared in what felt like a safe space. And then someone screenshots it, shares it, and suddenly your private words are public, being analyzed, judged, turned into gossip for an audience you never intended to reach. Screenshot culture has transformed gossip by eliminating the barrier between private and public. Anything you say anywhere can be captured and shared. The context stripped away. The audience changed. And what was meant for one person or a small group becomes content for thousands. The violation is layered. First, there's the breach of trust. Someone you thought was safe took your words and made them public. Then there's the loss of context. Screenshots rarely include the full conversation. Just the part that's most damaging, most controversial, most shareable. And finally, there's the permanence. Once it's out, it's out. Deleting doesn't help. The screenshot exists, and it can be shared endlessly. What makes screenshot gossip particularly effective is its perceived authenticity. It's not hearsay. It's not someone's interpretation. It's your actual words, right there in the image. And that authenticity gives the gossip credibility. People don't question whether you said it. They just react to what you said, without knowing why, to whom, or in what context. In group chats, screenshot culture creates paranoia. You can't speak freely because you never know who might screenshot, who might share, what might get taken out of context and turned into public gossip. So conversations become careful, guarded, performative. Because anything you say might end up as evidence in a narrative you didn't write. In professional settings, screenshot gossip destroys careers. A frustrated message about a client, a venting session about a colleague, a private opinion about company decisions. All it takes is one screenshot shared with the wrong person, and the gossip spreads. Not as context-rich conversation, as a smoking gun. Proof of what you really think, and defending it becomes nearly impossible because the words are yours. Just stripped of everything that made them make sense. Subtweeting Psychology. You didn't name them, but everyone knows who you're talking about. The vague post. The pointed comment. The quote that's clearly about someone specific, even though you never said their name, and the people who follow you. They figure it out. They start speculating. And the gossip that emerges fills in the blanks you deliberately left empty. Subtweeting is gossip with plausible deniability. You get to express frustration, share judgment, make accusations, all while maintaining you never mentioned anyone. If confronted, you can claim it wasn't about them, that they're reading into it, that they're being paranoid. But the subtext was clear, and everyone who saw it knew exactly who you meant. The appeal is control. You get to shape the narrative without the risk of direct confrontation. You get to express anger or disappointment publicly without having to defend it in conversation. And you get the satisfaction of knowing the target will see it, will know it's about them, but can't respond without confirming they're the subject. But subtweeting also invites speculation. When you're vague, your audience fills in details. They guess who. They guess why. And the gossip that forms around your subtweet often goes further than what you intended. Your followers start analyzing your recent interactions, looking for clues, building theories. And what started as a pointed comment becomes a full narrative about conflict, betrayal, or drama that you never fully spelled out. In online communities, subtweeting creates fractures. People take sides based on incomplete information. They defend or attack based on speculation. And the person being subtweeted, if they choose to respond, either confirms they're the target or looks paranoid for thinking it was about them. There's no good move. And the subtweeter, having started the gossip without committing to it, watches from a distance while the community does the rest. What makes subtweeting psychologically messy is that it's passive-aggressive by design. It avoids direct communication while ensuring the message gets across. And the gossip it generates serves as a proxy for the conversation you didn't want to have. The community discusses what you implied. The target feels the weight of public judgment. And you maintain you never said anything specific. But the damage is done. And the gossip fills in everything you left unsaid. Anonymized gossiping. No one knows who posted it. The account has no name, no face, no identifying details. Just information, stories about people, accusations, revelations. And because it's anonymous, it spreads without accountability. The gossip flows freely because the source can't be traced, can't be challenged, can't be held responsible. Anonymized gossiping removes the social cost of spreading information. Normally, gossip comes with risk. If you're wrong, if you're malicious, if you're caught exaggerating, your reputation suffers. But anonymity eliminates that risk. You can say anything, share anything. And if it's false, if it's damaging, if it ruins someone, you face no consequences. The mechanism is simple. People submit gossip to anonymous accounts. Those accounts post it. And the information spreads as if it's fact, even though there's no way to verify it. No way to trace it back. No way to hold anyone accountable for accuracy. The gossip becomes untethered from truth, driven only by how interesting, how scandalous, how shareable it is. In schools and workplaces, anonymous gossip accounts wreak havoc. They post rumors about relationships, conflicts, secrets. And because no one knows who's behind them, everyone's a suspect. Trust erodes. People become paranoid. And the gossip, unverified and often exaggerated, shapes reputations without anyone being able to defend themselves or challenge the source. What makes anonymized gossiping particularly toxic is the absence of correction mechanisms. When gossip has a source, you can confront them. You can challenge the information. You can demand accountability. But when the source is anonymous, there's nothing to push back against. The gossip just exists. And defending yourself against it makes you look guilty. Because why would you care unless it's true? The irony is that anonymity claims to protect free speech, to allow people to share information they couldn't share otherwise. But what it actually does is protect gossip from accountability. It creates a space where rumors thrive not because they're true, but because they're consequence-free. And the people harmed by that gossip have no recourse. No way to trace the damage back to its source. No way to make it stop. Plausibility by repetition in gossip. Hear something once, you question it. Hear it twice, you start wondering. Hear it 5 times from different people, and suddenly it feels true. Not because new evidence appeared. Just because repetition creates the illusion of verification. This is how rumors become facts in gossip networks. The first person who shares it hedges. I heard this, but I don't know if it's true. The second person drops the hedge. Apparently this happened. The third person states it as fact. Did you know this happened? And by the fifth retelling, no one remembers it was ever uncertain. The repetition has transformed speculation into accepted reality. The psychology is straightforward. Our brains use familiarity as a proxy for truth. When we encounter information repeatedly, it starts feeling more credible. Not because we've verified it, but because the exposure makes it familiar. And familiar feels true. The gossip network exploits this by circulating the same story through multiple paths. Each time you hear it, even from different people, your brain registers it as confirmation. In workplaces, this turns rumors into policy decisions. I heard they're restructuring gets repeated enough times that people start planning as if it's confirmed. They update resumes. They have worried conversations. They change their behavior based on gossip that was never verified but feels certain because everyone's saying it. In social circles, repetition-based plausibility destroys reputations. A rumor about someone's character flaw gets shared across the network. Each person who repeats it adds credibility. And the target, unaware of how many times the story has circulated, has no idea their reputation has shifted based on gossip that gained weight purely through repetition. What makes this mechanism particularly insidious is that it bypasses critical thinking. You don't ask for evidence. You don't trace it back to a source. You just notice that multiple people are saying the same thing. And in a world where truth often does spread through consensus, your brain treats repetition as validation. But gossip repetition isn't consensus based on evidence. It's consensus based on circulation. And those are not the same thing. Gossip fatigue. At first, you're interested. The drama, the updates, the inside information. But after months of the same conversations, the same speculations, the same recycled observations about the same people, something shifts. You're tired. Not just of the gossip, of the energy it takes to care. Gossip fatigue sets in when gossip stops being engaging and starts being exhausting. When every gathering turns into the same discussion. When every conversation circles back to the same drama. When the social reward of being informed no longer outweighs the emotional cost of constant involvement in other people's problems. The fatigue comes from several sources. There's the repetition. Hearing the same story analyzed from slightly different angles stops being interesting and starts being tedious. There's the emotional labor. Gossip often requires you to react, to have opinions, to take sides. And maintaining those reactions across dozens of conversations drains you. And there's the awareness that this isn't going anywhere. The gossip doesn't resolve. It just continues. And your investment in it feels increasingly pointless. You see it in long-running conflicts where the gossip network has been active for months. People who were initially engaged start pulling back. They stop asking for updates. They change the subject when it comes up, not because the conflict resolved, but because they've hit their limit for caring about it. The gossip has worn them down. In tight-knit communities where gossip is constant, fatigue shows up as withdrawal. People who used to be central to the network start distancing themselves. They attend fewer gatherings. They respond less to messages. They create boundaries around what they're willing to discuss. Because the alternative, staying fully engaged with the gossip flow, has become unsustainable. What's interesting about gossip fatigue is that it often coincides with a value shift. When you're tired of gossip, you start noticing how much time it consumes, how little it adds, how much damage it causes. And that awareness makes it harder to participate without guilt. The fatigue isn't just about being tired. It's about recognizing that this isn't how you want to spend your energy. And once you see that, going back to full participation feels impossible. Defensive gossip avoidance. You know they're talking. You can feel it. The conversations that pause when you walk in. The looks. The carefully neutral responses when you're around, and you make a choice. Don't engage. Don't ask. Don't give them anything new to talk about. Just keep your head down and wait for it to pass. Defensive gossip avoidance is the strategy of minimizing exposure when you know you're the subject. It's not about confronting the gossip. It's about starving it, giving it nothing to feed on, hoping that if you stay quiet, stay boring, stay unremarkable, the interest will fade and the gossip will move on to someone else. The reasoning makes sense. Gossip thrives on reaction. If you defend yourself, the defense becomes new gossip. If you confront the people spreading it, the confrontation becomes the story. If you change your behavior dramatically, the change gets analyzed. So you do nothing. You become as invisible as possible. You avoid situations where you might be observed, judged, discussed. But defensive avoidance comes with costs. You're isolating yourself to protect yourself. You're pulling back from relationships, from opportunities, from normal social engagement because you're afraid of feeding the gossip. And that withdrawal often gets interpreted as guilt, as having something to hide, which generates more gossip. The very strategy meant to starve the gossip can end up fueling it. In workplaces, defensive avoidance looks like people skipping social events, avoiding casual conversations, keeping interactions purely professional. They're trying to be gossip-proof. But the distance creates its own narrative. Why are they being so weird? What are they trying to hide? And the gossip continues, just with different content. In friend groups, it shows up as people who used to be open becoming guarded. They share less. They deflect questions. They keep things surface level. And the friendships suffer because the defensiveness creates distance that wasn't there before. The gossip might eventually fade. But the relationships, strained by months of defensive withdrawal, don't always recover. Innocent gossip rationalization. I'm not gossiping. I'm just concerned. The words come easily, and they feel true. Because you are concerned. You do care, and the conversation you're having, the information you're sharing about someone else's life, feels justified. Necessary, even. It's not gossip if the intentions are good. Right? Innocent gossip rationalization is the process of reframing gossip as something else. As caring. As problem-solving. As community-building. As anything other than what it actually is. And the rationalization works because gossip rarely feels malicious to the person doing it. It feels like natural conversation. Like staying informed. Like being a good friend. The mental gymnastics are subtle. You tell yourself you're sharing information people need to know. That you're helping by spreading awareness. That your concern justifies the discussion, and because you can find a prosocial motivation, you give yourself permission to participate without guilt. The gossip doesn't feel like gossip. It feels like responsible communication. But the rationalization ignores impact. Whether you call it concern or gossip, the effect is the same. Private information spreads. Reputations shift. The subject loses control of their own narrative. And the damage happens regardless of your intentions. Good motives don't prevent harm. They just make it easier to justify. You see this everywhere. In families where gossip gets framed as keeping everyone connected. In workplaces where gossip gets labeled as necessary context sharing. In friend groups where gossip gets packaged as collective problem solving. The rationalization changes the label. But it doesn't change what's happening. People are still talking about someone who isn't there. Still shaping perceptions. Still spreading information that wasn't theirs to share. What makes innocent gossip rationalization dangerous is that it prevents self-awareness. If you don't see what you're doing as gossip, you don't apply the same ethical standards. You don't question whether you should share. You don't consider the consequences. You just talk. And the rationalization ensures you feel good about it. even when the person you're discussing would absolutely call it gossip if they knew. Social validation through gossip. You share an observation about someone, and the person you're talking to agrees. I noticed that too. And in that moment something shifts. You're not imagining it. You're not being paranoid. Your perception was right. And that validation, that confirmation that someone else sees what you see, feels deeply satisfying. Social validation through gossip is about using shared observations to confirm your reality. When you gossip, you're not just sharing information. You're testing whether others interpret the world the way you do. And when they agree, when they confirm your observations, it validates your judgment, your perspective, your understanding of social dynamics. The need for this validation is human. We're constantly trying to figure out if what we see is real or if we're reading too much into things. And gossip provides a quick, informal reality check. You mention that someone seemed off. If the other person agrees, you feel reassured. If they disagree, you recalibrate. Either way, the gossip serves as a tool for social calibration. But validation through gossip creates echo chambers. You're more likely to gossip with people who share your perspective. And when they confirm your observations, it reinforces your view without testing it against alternative interpretations. The validation feels like truth, but it's just agreement. An agreement within a like-minded group isn't the same as accuracy. In groups with strong internal cohesion, validation through gossip cements collective narratives. Everyone agrees on who's difficult, who's unreliable, who's problematic. And that agreement feels like objective truth. But it's just a shared interpretation that never got challenged. The gossip validated itself through circulation among people already inclined to agree. What makes this troubling is that validation through gossip doesn't just confirm observations. It confirms judgments. When you share a criticism and someone agrees, you're not just validating the observation. You're validating the negative assessment. And that validation makes the judgment feel more justified, more certain, more like fact. Even though it's still just two people agreeing on an interpretation that others might see completely differently. Contagious suspicion. One person expresses doubt. Something feels off about them, and suddenly you're paying attention, looking for signs. And once you start looking, you find them. Small things, inconsistencies, behaviors that, before the suspicion was planted, you wouldn't have noticed or thought twice about. But now they feel significant, confirming. Contagious suspicion is how doubt spreads through gossip networks. It doesn't require evidence, just suggestion. Once someone voices suspicion, it infects the group's perception. People start watching, analyzing. And normal behavior viewed through the lens of suspicion starts looking suspicious. The gossip creates the very pattern it claims to observe. The mechanism is cognitive. Suspicion activates confirmation bias. When you're suspicious, your brain prioritizes information that confirms the suspicion and filters out information that contradicts it. You notice the time someone was vague. You remember the instances they seemed distant. You forget all the times they were straightforward and present. And the accumulated observations, skewed by selective attention, make the suspicion feel justified. In relationships, contagious suspicion destroys trust before anything wrong has actually happened. A friend mentions they think their partner might be hiding something. They share small observations. And suddenly the friend group is suspicious too. Everyone's watching. And the partner, who might be completely innocent, feels the shift. The changed atmosphere. And their response to that tension, to being under unspoken surveillance, often creates the distance that the suspicion predicted. The gossip-fueled doubt becomes self-fulfilling. At work, contagious suspicion targets people based on minimal triggers. Someone misses a few meetings, seems distracted. The gossip starts. I think they're job hunting. And once that suspicion spreads, every behavior gets interpreted through that lens. They're taking calls outside, interviewing. They're updating LinkedIn, definitely leaving. They're quiet in meetings, already checked out. The suspicion, spread through gossip, reframes everything they do. What makes contagious suspicion particularly destructive is that it's invisible to the subject. They don't know they're being watched with suspicion. They don't know their behavior is being reinterpreted. They just notice relationships getting weird. Trust eroding. And they have no way to defend themselves against a suspicion they don't even know exists. The gossip creates a hidden reality where they're guilty until proven innocent. And they don't even know they're on trial.